Hello, everyone, and welcome to Performance. This is the final kind of contemporary performance clip for us for this term, um, and it comes at a perfect time because not only have we had lots of interesting conversations, both in person but also on the discussion boards, about the nature of performance and the parameters of performance, but we are currently living in a time. Um, I mean, I mean a time in like the last 10 years, but also really specifically within probably the last 3 years, when performance has really risen in its visibility. And so I'm going to be talking today about a few projects by contemporary artists that are dealing with performance, but also I'm going to close with a little brief section on the historization, or the historiography is actually the correct word. The historiography of performance. How do we write a history of performance art? Um, and we are today going to be launching into Pablo Helguera's text, Education for Socially Engaged Art, which I hope all of you have enjoyed the brevity and levity of this tiny little book. But I'm going to be talking about the 5 chapters that I assigned and the terms that he associates or that he covers in those chapters. So we're going to have situation, antagonism, performance, and documentation. But of course, then I'm going to wrap it up with history. Um, and this isn't going to just be 2 slides, so it's going to be a little more engaging than all that. And so, you know, the biggest conversation that we've had on the discussion boards, but it's come up a little bit in conversations I've had with the students in public, with you students in public, uh, has been about really where do the parameters of performance fall? What is considered performative? What is not considered performative? And in the introduction to Helguera's text, he brings up an interesting point. How to use art in the social realm? He's introducing his ideas. He's going to be talking about socially engaged art, art of the performance, art of the collaborative, what Kester calls dialogical practices, what other people generally refer to as social practice. All is in the consideration of how we, within the creative field, use art in the social realm. But that can be expanded quite vastly when you think about it, because if an artwork is put on view in the Museum of Modern Art, it ostensibly enters the public realm or the social realm, and therefore has a performance of its own. And so, in previous conversations, when I've said that everything actually becomes performative, I mean it in that sense, that every object has a performative existence, because once it leaves its creator's hand or its creator's studio or whatever, once it's made, it enters into history and therefore enters into the social. And so even works by outsider artists or quote unquote outsider artists, people who were working in reclusive cabins in the woods or apartments in Chicago, who might have never thought their work would enter the public sphere, you know, eventually it might. And when it does, that's when it becomes performative. When it's in the studio, it has a performance, but it's very intimate. It's just kind of interior. Um, but, that's the big scope of the term performative. What we're going to be talking about today is really the legacy of people, bodies, in art viewing space as part of a project designed by an artist. And so we're going to see dancers, we're going to see fashion models, we're going to see average Joes, and all of them are going to be incorporated in this idea or in this heading of performance. So, starting off with situation. The chapter on situation, I think, is incredibly important, given that a lot of you and I know that some of you might think I'm speaking directly to you, but I'm actually speaking to quite a few of you, because quite a few of you have launched projects that involve the social sphere, that involve you talking to people outside of your studio and having them actively be involved in the production of your work. This can take the shape of interviews, it can take the shape of images, it can take the shape of actual collaborative practice, it can take the shape of putting something outside for an unwilling public. Now, when Helguera talks about situation, he stresses the importance that you understand what situation you are creating. Because without understanding that situation, you run the risk of creating, well, basically a breakdown, a structural roadblock where your project basically can't function, or it doesn't function the way that you want it to function because the relationship that you've established with your audience and with your collaborative partners isn't working out quite that well. And uh, he references a few different examples. Obviously, he's talking in code with these examples because he doesn't want to implicate people specifically. But he talks about a few different examples where the artist didn't quite fully embrace the situation that their work was engaging in, and what happens when that bubbles up. Now, I'm talking about this during performance and not collaboration because collaboration brings up a whole slew of other issues, but performance and the fact that a performance can happen very passively uh, does also, I think, more strongly engage with the idea of situation. If you walk into a gallery space and there's a performance going on, that charges the situation that you're putting yourself into. You're not necessarily collaborating with them, but you are a part of that project. Um, Now, with regard to the projects going on within our class, yes, you are dealing with more collaborative ideas, and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about that next week when we talk about dialogue. But I just want to talk a little bit more about the idea of situation and audience. Now, I'm showing you here the graphic design for Performa 13, which is a biennial of performance practice that goes on in New York City every 2 years. This being Performa, of 2013, not Performa number 13, because this is actually number 5. So, this is the website for Performa. And here you can see, I'm opening up the calendar, it's going to take a second, but here you can see that there's quite a few events that are going on during this project. And you can see they're repeating. It's structured very similarly to, say, a film festival, where there might be 50 films, but out of those 50 films, there's 125 screenings, so that people can see the films even if it doesn't fall perfectly into their schedule. And so that's what's happening here. And so, you have Alexander Singh here, The Humans, and then farther down, it's another restaging of it. You have Jerome Bell and Theodore Hora's project here, and they have another staging of it here. Um, this the situation of this work fully understands its audience, and that's why I wanted to talk about Performa, because these this festival brings a certain kind of audience to it. People know Performa, they know it well, they want to go to Performa. It's a big deal when Performa comes to town. And here you can see all of the people that are participating. Michael Bell Smith had a show at the ICA, so that should be a name that a few of you remember. Who else is in here? I mean, a lot of these people are kind of the high names of performance art. Rashid Johnson, um, Joan Jonas is somewhere in here because she is doing a project. Pope L is in here. I mean, there's lots of people. I recommend looking at this website. It's 13.performa-arts.org. Or if you just Google Performa, you're going to find it. Um, So the situation of this work hinges on the fact that people know they're coming to a performance arts festival. It sets that up. And so in to a certain extent what we have here with this festival is something that's very much part of the kind of the trajectory of the fine arts. It's this is effectively a durational museum where the curators behind this project do their due diligence over the course of the few years they have in prep to bring in the best and the brightest or the most interesting, but all of the work is within the language of performance. And whenever these festivals come up, and I'm referencing slightly the article that I sent out from the BBC a few weeks ago, um, the conversation on performance art is drummed up in contemporary press. Art critics talk about performance. They talk about all the work in that they see in relation to performance. It brings to mind the nature of this work and its legacy going back to the 1970s. And so, with regard to the viewer situation, they this kind of sets the bar for performance strategies and sets it inside of its white cube. Although some of these projects extend outside of that, but they all engage with this discourse surrounding the performance and the performative. Now, this is the end of video one, and we're going to be moving into antagonism um, with video two. So, situation.